Economic Update webinar with Anirban Basu. I'm Zach Fritz of Sage Policy Group. I'd like to start by thanking the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce for making this event possible, and also our sponsors, the Carroll County Public Library, Exploration Commons, the Community Media Center, and the Aquino Financial Group. We're going to get going here in just a second, but first a few quick housekeeping items. This meeting is being held here virtually and streamed live on channel HD 1086 and channel 19. It's also being recorded. We'll have more info on how you can access that recording a little bit later. So we will be doing a live question and answer session at the end of today. For those of you watching through GoToWebinar, so if you are, you can go to the GoToWebinar panel on the side of your screen. You'll see a place where you can type in questions. Send me any you have, and we'll answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. Now it's my pleasure to turn things over to the president of the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce, Mike Mcmullen. Mike?
Thank you so much, Zach. Again, I want to welcome you all for being here with us today. It's great to be able to have an event like this. It'd be really nice to be able to be live, but since we can't, COVID has kind of put a lockhold on a lot of that. It's great to have you all here. This is our second year bringing you Anirban Basu, and we're excited to have him back. He's funny and he's smart, and he keeps you on your toes, and he helps you to laugh once in a while too. And in this day and age, laughing's a good thing. As Zach said, my name is Mike Mcmullen. I'm president of the Chamber, and two things that a lot of folks don't know about us is that we're not part of the government. A lot of people sometimes think that we are. We're not, and we're not part of some like actual network like the U.S. Chamber down to the Maryland Chamber. We are a standalone, independent nonprofit that's been around since 1924, and we have about 640 members. And I want to thank you if you're one of them, and if you're not, you probably should be. So that being said, I'm going to turn things over to the main MC, I guess, of the day, and that is Mr. Steve Aquino, who is from Aquino Financial Group. He's a past chair of the board and the 2021 current chair of the board. Steve, they're all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. And I'd like to welcome everybody to another year of a great presentation, exciting presentation, especially after everything that we've seen going on in the world and everything that's going on the economics and market side of things. So we're very, very excited to have Dr. Anirban Basu giving us his fantastic, entertaining presentation. Again, I'm Steve Aquino of Aquino Financial Group and currently serving as the chair of the board for the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce. And this is my second term from 10 years ago when I first served as the chair. So I'm very honored and privileged to be able to do that and be here with you today. As usual, we like to, encourage everybody to shop local, especially with our chamber members. Go to the website, look at all of our member directory, keep things, moving here and trying to keep building up as best as we can as we start getting back into some kind of normalcy that we're starting to see these days. And with that being said, we also have a couple of great sponsors and partners of the Chamber that I'd like to introduce to say a few words who help us put on incredible programs like this. But before I do that, I'd like to go through some of the upcoming events that we have going on in the Chamber. And I'm proud to say that we're starting to get things going into live phases of meetings again. On May 20th, we do have a luncheon that is sold out. It's going to be featuring Dr. Roger Casey and Julia Jaskin of McDaniel College. So even though it's sold out, I know it's going to be streaming, so please check that out and see where you can, at least log in and see what's happening. On May 25th, we do have a new member meet and greet at the town mall. It's free to all. Just go to our website and register online. We also have Leadership Carroll Commencement on Tuesday, which will be a live event, June 8th. It's going to be a luncheon. And again, we still have room to attend, so go to our website or reach out to the Chamber office to be able to sign up and register for that. Our Leadership Carroll class of 2022 is full, but we are still accepting applications to go into our waiting list. So that's an incredible program that the Chamber puts on to be able to really educate, about our community. We are also having our 10th annual Carroll County Biz Challenge. We are still accepting applications through the end of May, and it's free to apply. This year's grand prize is actually $10,000 in cash with an additional $24,000 in other prizes, including a new website. So if you know somebody who qualifies to be able to apply, please encourage them to apply as soon as possible. With that being said, those are some of our upcoming events. Now I'd like to move on to introducing our sponsors of this event. First, I'd like to introduce Richard Turner, who's the executive director of the Carroll County Media Center, who's going to say a few words, and we appreciate your support, Richard. It's all yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Steve, Mike, and Steve. You guys are great and appreciate the network that the Chamber provides us in terms of reaching into our community. And I hope there are people who are watching who aren't members will consider becoming a member, because it's a great opportunity not only to learn about business that's going on in our community like we are doing today, but also being able to network with members and help our community become the shining star it really is. So it's a great opportunity. Also, just wanted to say it's great to be a streaming partner, helping as part of our mission as a nonprofit focused on getting the community informed, keeping us plugged in and connected, is that this kind of content is really important. We share it with our community, and that's part of our mission. And so if you've got any of you who are out there as viewers or have events that are going on, please reach out to us and see how we can partner in terms of getting more information about what's going on in our community. And with that, I'll just say, go ahead and watch local as well as shop local, so that you can see what's going on. Tune into our website at carrollmediacenter.org, our YouTube channels, like, subscribe, help share, get the word out about what's going on in our community and the great stuff that's going on. So thanks very much. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you so much, Richard. We appreciate your support. Before I introduce our next sponsor again, I'd like to thank everybody for being a part of our program today. Please go to our website, see the upcoming events, see what's going on out there, keep shopping local, and keep looking for members to support. So our next sponsor that I'd like to introduce is Andrea Burstel, who's the executive director of the Carroll County Public Library, who's going to give us a lot of updated information of what's going on over there at the library. A lot of good, exciting things. So thank you, Andrea. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. And I want to say thank you to Mike and the Chamber for bringing Anirban Basu back to us here in Carroll County. We are pleased to be able to sponsor this event once again. Carroll County Public Library is open for business and ready to serve the county. We continue to take every opportunity to provide easy access to our books, movies, music, magazines, and audiobooks, both in person and online. Over the past year, we have added things. Our highly trained staff continues to provide a wide range of online programs for all ages. Story times, book groups, cooking classes, home decorating presentations, and multiple science and technology workshops are just some of the programming that's available live and 24/7 through our YouTube channel. We have online training available through lynda.com, streaming movies, documentaries, foreign and independent films with Canopy, and access to thousands of comics and graphic novels with Comics Plus. All of these are new in the last year. And the summer will bring even more fun. Celebrating America's Summer Adventure is already underway. You can register online at library.car.org. And in just a month, we will launch Tales and Tales, this year's summer reading program. Our biggest edition, however, is just about ready to open. Exploration Commons at 50 East will provide the greater Carroll County region with a first of its kind collaborative learning experience. This unique state-of-the-art facility is located in the 14,000 square feet of the lower level of Westminster Branch Library. In here, you will find a 1,400 square foot commercial teaching kitchen with a full commercial line of equipment. Here we can provide training for food service staff, offer workshops in nutrition, healthy cooking, and wellness, provide hands-on classes for children, teens, and adults on how to cook, and host demonstrations by local chefs and cookbook authors. Next door, there are 4 meeting facilities ready to host your meetings of 2 up to 150, loaded with state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment, 55 to 90-inch monitors, high-speed internet, all in a professional environment. You can meet in person, online, or both. The heart of the facility is a 3,500 square foot high-tech makerspace, outfitted with the latest equipment and software, including a CNC router, 3D printer farm, high-quality textile equipment, an audio lab for recordings, an AR/VR lab to assist in creating and experiencing augmented and virtual realities, and a fabrication lab with soldering stations and 2 laser etchers. This space is designed to assist local businesses, entrepreneurs, and students by providing hands-on learning experiences using the latest tech and equipment possible. We look forward to hosting many of our community groups, such as the Boys and Girls Club of Westminster, ARC of Carroll County, Change, and Target. We also look forward to working with the Chamber to encourage local business owners and employees to use the space to design and prototype. It'll be like having your own R&D department. The best part of this resource will be the 8 fully trained expert staff who will man the center, provide one-on-one and classroom teaching, and facilitate the use of all the equipment. Exploration Commons will open this summer, but we are in need of funding to cover some of the construction costs for this wonderful educational facility. We welcome all gifts, and naming opportunities begin at $5,000. There are 1 or 2 major spaces still available. Please contact us at the Carroll County Public Library or visit Exploration Commons online at explorationcommons.carr.org if you have any interest in investing in the future of libraries and the future of Carroll County. So thank you to the Chamber for making this time available to us, and I have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker for the day, Anirban Basu. Excuse me. The title of today's presentation is Anirban Basu and the Chamber of Data. Being a big Harry Potter fan, I think this is great. At last, 2021 is here. This presentation supplies economic data and analysis juxtaposing the pre-pandemic and pandemic world, and then supplies a forecast for the post-pandemic one. Among the areas of focus are labor markets, financial markets, real estate construction, consumer spending, business investment, international trade, and government finances. Anirban Basu is chairman and CEO of Sage Policy Group, Inc., an economic and policy consulting firm in Baltimore. In 2014, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan appointed him chair of the Maryland Economic Development Commission. Anirban also serves as the chief economist to the Associated Builders and Contractors and as a chief economic advisor to the Construction Financial Management Association. In 2007, and then again in 2016, Dr. Basu was selected by the Daily Record newspaper as one of Maryland's 50 most influential people. The Baltimore Business Journal named him one of the region's 20 most powerful business leaders in 2010. He holds 4 graduate degrees, including a Juris Doctorate and a PhD. Please join me in giving a warm Carroll County welcome to Anirban Basu.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that very kind and lengthy introduction. So I thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who is here, of course, to talk about the economy. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end of my comments. This event is scheduled to end at 10 a.m., so I want to respect your time, of course, but it should leave plentiful time for Q&A. And of course, we're all adults, and so if you need to leave, you need to leave. But I want to thank again all of the event sponsors, including, of course, the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce, the Carroll County Public Library, Exploration Commons at 50 East, the Community Media Center. It's the Community Media Center. And then, of course, the Quino Financial Group. You can see the pyramid there, a symbol of longevity, stability, durability. And so thanks a lot for being here. Let's talk about the economy. You heard already the title of the presentation, Anirban Basu and the Chamber of Data. Yes, this is a Harry Potter themed presentation, and you'll see that theming throughout this morning, whether you like it or not. I hope you don't hate it. So again, thanks to the Chamber of Commerce and all of the sponsors. Let's get right into a discussion of the economy. I think we can agree that the single most influential factor shaping economic outcomes continues to be COVID-19. Now, this has been a shared global phenomenon. As Americans, I think we can see light at the end of the tunnel. Some people are taking off their masks and waving them in the air like they just don't care, that kind of thing. Though this has been a shared global phenomenon, the response of various people around the world to the crisis has been very different in nature. It's certainly been different across governments, whether state governments here in America or national governments across the world. Many households have responded differently to the crisis. We have been prisoners of our homes, prisoners of our house cabans. Not every American family looks like this. Some do, some don't. But the point is, many of us have spent a long time or a lot of time at home. And these behavioral shifts wrought by the pandemic have created economic implications. And we want to talk about those economic implications at both micro and macro levels. I'll explain what I mean by that as I go through the presentation. So yes, again, a shared global event, a shared global public health crisis, and yet very different responses to the crisis and therefore very different economic outcomes. This map comes from the International Monetary Fund. It's a reflection of 2020 global economic growth. Now on this map, green is good because green signifies that economies grew in 2020. There is some green on the map, most notably in China, which last year grew 2.3% economically. Of course, China home to the world's second largest economy. They were not alone. The Laotian economy grows last year. The Vietnamese economy grows 2.9%. The Taiwanese economy 3.0%. You can see some growth in Western Africa, for instance, including in nations like the Ivory Coast, which as a single man I refer to as the Côte d'Ivoire as part of a broader strategy, not an effective strategy. East of the Caspian Sea, you can see nations like Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan grew as well. These are natural resource intensive societies. Red is bad because red signifies that economies shrank in 2020. And you can see North America bathed in red. In fact, I can offer you some additional granularity around this. Same data source, the International Monetary Fund, but now I'm showing you actual numbers regarding 2020 economic performance. If you look toward the bottom of the slide, you can see that estimated growth of 2.3% in China. The US economy, and that's toward the middle of the slide, the US shrinks 3.5% economically last year. Now, we are not the worst performance in North America. The Canadian economy shrank more than 5%, the Mexican economy more than 8%, and North America was not the worst performer economically. That distinction may very well go to Europe. The Italian economy shrinking nearly 9%, the French economy roughly 8%, the Spanish economy 11%, and the United Kingdom, with its worst year economically since 1709, that of course is the year of the Great Frost. So really tough time for many economies around the world. Now, for me to suggest to you, the people of Carroll County, that the US economy shrank 3.5% last year would be A, accurate, but B, would miss out on a ton of nuance. There were moments, of course, during which US economic performance was perfectly dismal last year, but there are also moments during which the US economy bounced back with tremendous force. This is quarterly GDP growth or change. With 31 years of data here, back to the first quarter of 1990. Now, there are two shades of bars here, blue and red. The last blue-colored bar stretches into the fourth quarter of 2019. That's the last pre-pandemic quarter here in the United States of America. And those blue-colored bars are indexed to the left-hand vertical axis. There are 5 red-colored bars here. They are the first, second, third, fourth quarters of 2020 and the first quarter of 2021. We had to bifurcate the vertical axis for purposes of this slide, which sounds and is excruciatingly painful. Now, you'll remember that we came into 2020 with plentiful momentum. You remember the principal challenge facing Carroll County businesses, not-for-profits, government agencies, so on and so forth? Finding workers. The unemployment rate in February of 2020 in Carroll County was 3.0%. Nationally, it was 3.5%. So we come into the year, last year with plentiful momentum. We had jobs in January, 289,000 jobs in February, but of course we shut down the economy in March. And the last 3 weeks of March are so horrific for the economy that overall first quarter GDP shrank 5%. Again, that's the first red colored bar. The first red colored bar is the first quarter of last year, first quarter of 2020. Now that's big news. When the economy shrinks that much in a quarter, that's big news in and of its own right. So during the fourth quarter of 2008, which had been the worst quarter of our economic lives, this economy shrank 8.4% on an annualized basis. So a negative 5% print is nothing to scoff at. It's big news. But this time, unfortunately, it was merely the appetizer. For during the second quarter of 2020, the US economy shrinks 31.4% on an annualized basis, which is why we had to bifurcate the vertical axis, because if we try to graph a number of that magnitude on a single unified vertical axis, a lot of these other vertical bars simply disappear. Now, around that time, there was this raging debate in the economics community about whether or not the initial phase of economic recovery would look like a U, be U-shaped, L-shaped, Nike swoosh, check mark, square root, hockey stick. It was a straight up V. For during the third quarter of last year, the U.S. economy bounces back, growing 33.4% on an annualized basis, demonstrating that under the right conditions, the U.S. economy is capable of demonstrating remarkable recuperative power. Now, for reasons we'll get into during the fourth quarter, momentum wanes economically, and during the fourth quarter, the U.S. economy grows a bit more than 4% on an annualized basis. Further stimulus is injected into the economy by Donald Trump on December 27th, and then by Joseph Biden on March 11th of this year. And so that helped to power the first quarter. During the first quarter, the U.S. economy grows 6.4% on an annualized basis. Nonetheless, despite the fact that we had growth during the latter half of 2020, it is still the case that the U.S. economy ends up smaller at the end of last year than it began the year. And there are many implications to a shrunken economy. Let's talk about some of them. And let's begin with a discussion of the U.S. labor market. So this next slide will be the same setup, two colors of bars, but instead of being quarterly GDP, this is now monthly job change in America, monthly jobs, the employment report. So the last blue-colored bar here, and again, the blue-colored bars are indexed to the left-hand axis. The last blue-colored bar here is February of 2020. February of 2020, the last pre-pandemic or at least pre-crisis month in America. As I said earlier, in February of 2020, this nation added 289,000 net new jobs. February of 2020 represented the 113th consecutive month of job growth in America. Over those 113 months, this nation added 22 million net new jobs. As I said, we drove the overall rate of unemployment in this country down to 3.5%. That was a 50-year low. You'd have to go back to December of 1969 to find unemployment as low as it had been pre-crisis. And just to give you a sense of how long ago that was, the Orioles were good back then. It was a long time ago. Now, we shut down the economy in March. The first red-colored bar here is March of 2020. And in March of 2020, we lose 1.7 million jobs as a country. But that's misleading. Why? Because the so-called reference week, the week in which the underlying survey was conducted, was relatively early in March. So a lot of the jobs lost in March of 2020 didn't show up in the March jobs report. They would show up in the April jobs report, along with some of the jobs lost in April, of course. And in April, this nation loses 20.7 million jobs. If you do the math on that, between March and April of last year, we lost 22 million jobs, or as many jobs as we had added through the previous 113 months. We gave it all back. And around that time, the Wall Street Journal conducted a survey of economists, most economists who work for large U.S. financial institutions, like small business operators like myself. And those economists collectively forecast that in May of 2020, this nation would lose another 8 million jobs, adding to our collective misery. But we did not lose 8 million jobs as a country in May of 2020. We added 2.8 million of them, followed by 4.8 million jobs added in June of 2020, and 1.7 million jobs added in July, and 1.6 million in August, and 716,000 jobs in September, and 680,000 jobs in October. Phenomenal. Again, that V-shaped recovery. Now, as we head into the fourth quarter, U.S. momentum begins to fall apart. By October, November, December, retail sales are no longer growing. We'll talk about that. We start losing jobs by December of last year. We lost 306,000 jobs in December of 2020. Again, more stimulus is injected into the economy around that time, and we've been adding jobs ever since. Now, April's jobs report, you might have heard, was deeply disappointing. The nation added in April 266,000 jobs. Many economists predicted a number north of 1 million for the month, and they were way off. So we'll talk about what happened to cause the April jobs report to be so disappointing, but we'll get to that in a moment. Now, though I've suggested that the initial phase of expansion was V-shaped, please don't get me wrong. We're nowhere close to complete economic recovery. If you compare February of 2020 employment versus April of 2021 nationally, so that is a 14-month period, we're still down 8.2 million jobs since the pandemic began to turn the economy upside down and inside out. Now, these horizontal bars represent the change in number of jobs supported by each of these industries over this 14-month period. Again, February of 2020, last pre-pandemic month in America, the last month during which the economy was functioning functioning relatively normally. And then April of 2021, last month, for which we have employment data at the national level. So what this says is that the sector called leisure and hospitality lost more jobs than any other segment over that 14-month period, 2.8 million of them. These are your restaurant workers and your hotel workers. These are often entry-level and near entry-level workers. They really took it on the chin from the perspective of job security. It might surprise you to learn that the second leading sector in terms of job loss was government. Now, this is not federal government, this is state and local government, because state and local governments have to balance their budgets each and every fiscal year with limited exception. So if the revenues are not there, the cost must be cut. And the principal cost of government takes the form of human capital. It's teachers and teachers' aides, firefighters, police officers, garbage collectors, and of course, bus drivers. So this result prevails. Now, every sector of the economy lost jobs, but the sector that lost the fewest jobs, financial activities. Financial activities, of course, is a high-wage sector, but also involves a lot of people who can work remotely. So whereas leisure hospitality is about people who are delivering services in person, they have to be in your presence to deliver the service. That is not as much the case with a segment like financial activities or professional services, where many people can work remotely. Now, what about Maryland? I'm glad you asked. That's my next slide. Between February of 2020 and March of 2021, so the last month for which we have Maryland data is March of 2021. So now this is a 13-month comparison. During this period, our state lost 151,000 jobs, or 5.4% of its job totals. The nation in the same period, 13 months, lost 5.6% of its jobs. So we held on to our pre-existing base of employment a bit better than the balance of the country, but only a bit better. Mimicking the nation, number one sector losing jobs, leisure and hospitality. Again, those hotel and restaurant workers. It might surprise you to learn that we lost a lot of jobs in health services. So how is that possible, Anirban? Global pandemic. We see nurses working multiple shifts consecutively because of COVID-19 patients. Yes, some medical centers became busier, but lots of jobs were lost in the categories of home health. Many jobs were lost in physicians' offices, dental offices, as people postponed elective surgeries or dental visits, checkups. Now you can see that every major segment of the Maryland economy lost jobs over this 13-month period. So again, nowhere close to complete recovery. Just to put this into context, during a decent economic year, Maryland adds about 40,000 jobs, about 40,000 during a decent economic year. So we're down 151,000 jobs. So we're going to come back quickly later this year. I'll talk about that. But again, as of right now, nowhere close to complete recovery. Now, this broadens the regional perspective. This is employment growth for the 25 largest metropolitan areas in America. Again, for that February 2020 period through March of 2021. So again, pre-pandemic to the latest month for which we have data. So this is a mistitled slide. There is no employment growth here. Every one of the nation's 25 largest metropolitan areas lost jobs during this 13-month period, but some regions held on to more of their pre-existing employment base than others. At number one, San Antonio, Texas. Who is the governor of Texas? Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott has been one of these governors very keen on keeping his economy open during the crisis. Number two, Tampa. That's Florida. That's Governor Ron DeSantis. Governor Ron DeSantis, again, very keen on trying to keep that economy open during the crisis. Number three is Dallas. Again, that's Greg Abbott in Texas. And number four, Phoenix. Who's the governor of Arizona? Well, of course, it's Doug Ducey. Doug Ducey, again, one of these governors, very keen, very eager to keep that economy open. Fast forward to number seven, Atlanta, Georgia. Who's the governor of Georgia? It's Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp, again, very aggressive in keeping that economy open, was the first to reopen his economy, happened on April 20th of last year. In fact, sometimes you hear Georgians, not folks from Atlanta, but other folks from Georgia say that we never really shut down our economy. So some governors were very fixated on the economic and employment outcomes. Other governors more focused on the public health outcomes. Now, if you look at the bottom of the second column here, which region lost the most jobs as a fraction of their pre-existing base of employment? Orlando, Florida. Anirban, you ask, what's the narrative here, sir? That's Florida. That's Governor Ron DeSantis. What gives? What gives, of course, is the structure of the Orlando metropolitan area economy, which is about theme parks, leisure and hospitality, retail, trade. It's about in-person experience, not about remote work. And one could make the argument, cheekily, that the number one policymaker in Orlando is not the governor of Florida or the mayor of Orlando, it's Disney. Of course, Disney has had capacity constraints. Now, number 23, San Francisco, losing more than 10% of its pre-existing base of employment. Los Angeles, nearly 11%. Who's the governor of California? Why, it is the wickedly handsome Gavin Newsom. Himself could be a Hollywood actor, very aggressive in keeping that economy shut down. Not himself so much shut down, a bit of a party animal, but that economy shut down. And number 22, New York Metro. Who's the governor of New York? Well, I think we all know it's Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo, very aggressive in keeping that economy shut down, along with his counterpart in New Jersey, Phil Murphy. New York City, of course, was an early stage viral epicenter, so they felt the need, for instance, to shut down mass transit. And when you shut down mass transit, you end up shutting down a lot of the New York metropolitan area economy. And number 21, Boston. Who's the governor of Massachusetts? It is Charlie Baker. Charlie Baker happens to be a Republican, very aggressive in keeping that economy shut down. So again, some governors more focused on economic and employment outcomes, other governors more focused on public health outcomes. It's not for me to say to you which is better, which is the better approach. That's for you to decide. I'm merely pointing out the obvious as an economist, that these types of policy decisions have major economic consequences, though of course they're not the only factor shaping these data. Unemployment. So I mentioned a moment ago that we began the crisis at 3.5% unemployment. By April of 2020, that's the big peak you see here, it's 14.7%. Now here I'm offering you some additional granularity. I'm showing you male unemployment in blue, female unemployment in green, and overall unemployment in red. Now during the Great Recession, the downturn that begins in very late 2007, but gets really bad in 2008 into 2009, men suffered relatively more. And that was because of large-scale job losses in male-dominated categories like manufacturing and construction, each of those categories losing about 2 million jobs during the period of the respective downturns. Now, both of those segments, as it turns out, pretty important to the Carroll County economy. This time was different. This time, women were hit harder economically. This was leisure and hospitality, retail, trade, daycare centers, salons, private schools, public schools, so on and so forth. Lots of job loss in female-dominated categories. And so in April of 2020, while the overall rate of unemployment is 14.7%, for women it's 16.1% that month. For men that month, it was 13.6%. Now you can see the improvement that has been rendered since that time. By April, we're down to 6.1% unemployment. And if you flip this line upside down, and why on God's green earth would you do that? It's because less is more here. The lower the number, the better. This is unemployment. So if you flip this line upside down, what would you see? You would see the letter V. And again, the reason I keep bringing this up, this notion of a V-shaped recovery, and I'll keep doing it as it turns out a number of additional times, is that it informs our forecast for 2021 into 2022. And that's ultimately what we want to get toward, is not just a description of what's taking place, but what's likely to transpire during the months and quarters ahead. Now, same 25 metropolitan areas, but this is now unemployment rates for March of 2021. The lowest is in Atlanta, Brian Kemp. The highest is in Los Angeles, Gavin Newsom. Now, you can see where Washington and Baltimore rank. If you go back to the previous slide, actually, let me do that. It's dangerous to do this, but let me do this. If you go, this is employment growth. This is the employment growth slide you saw a moment ago. You see that Baltimore actually lost a smaller proportion of its job base than Washington Metro. So, Anirban, how is that possible? Washington Metro has all of those federal workers, defense contractors, non-defense contractors. True. But Washington Metro also has a massive leisure and hospitality sector, and one that depends disproportionately on global leisure travel. In a way, Baltimore's leisure sector doesn't depend on that, and it's not as big. Now, it is still the case, now I'm going to go back to the unemployment slide. So this is the regional unemployment slide. Washington Metro still has a slightly lower rate of unemployment than Baltimore, but the gap is very small, the smallest we've seen in years. Now, again, the lowest is Atlanta, highest is Los Angeles, and Washington, Baltimore, by these measures at least, have held up better than much of the balance of the country. Now, speaking of holding up better than others, what about Carroll County? This is unemployment for the 24 major jurisdictions in Maryland, 23 counties and Baltimore City. Who has the lowest rate of unemployment? Carroll County. I bolded it for you. It's impressive performance. Now, again, not back to where we had been. In February of 2020, the rate of unemployment in Carroll County, this is the Carroll County unemployment rate, was 3.0%. We're at 4.2% now, or at least according to the latest data. So we're not back to where we had been economically. And of course, one of the things that we know is that the labor force is smaller than it used to be. So about 3.5 million Americans have left the labor force since February of 2020 on net. So if you added those folks back into the ranks of job seekers across the country, the actual rate of unemployment would be closer to 8.2%, as opposed to that 6.1% official rate of unemployment. And I think that 8.2% figure is probably more accurate as a reflection of where we are in the economic cycle. Nonetheless, you can see significant progress here, including in Carroll County, where people have been aggressively getting back to work. Now, again, we're not there in terms of complete recovery. This is Carroll County employment by place of residence. And what this really is, these bars are the net change over the last 12 months. So it's a year-over-year comparison. So what I'm trying to say here to you is that in March of 2021, this is again by place of residence. So what does this mean? This doesn't mean that there's 6,500 fewer jobs in Carroll County. What this means is that the population of people who live in Carroll County with a job has fallen by 65 or almost 6,600 over the past year. So again, the unemployment rate looks favorable, but a lot of people have yet to return to the labor market. They might not have returned because their kids are being taught remotely. I mean, all kinds of factors. You know, there's been a big controversy about unemployment insurance and the role that stepped-up unemployment insurance plays in keeping people out of the labor market and therefore out of the unemployment rate calculation. So again, a lot of work to be done by the Chamber of Commerce, by economic development, by other forces for good in Carroll County. But again, I think if you look at the last 13 or 14 months, we have to conclude that Carroll County has held up much better than most American communities. Now, some other implications of COVID-19. So one of the other things that we saw last year was the significant involvement of government in our lives, economically and otherwise, public health. So if you're familiar with the Harry Potter books and movies, you know that in the Harry Potter books and movies, the government for the witches and wizards was the Ministry of Magic, the Ministry of Magic. Now, I don't know how much magic comes out of Washington, D.C. I can tell you a lot of dollars come out of there. Last year, 3 major stimulus packages passed. The first one was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, signed by Donald Trump on March 27th. That was a $2.2 to $2.3 trillion package, and this became the model for all subsequent stimulus packages. This included direct payments to Americans. You might remember those $1,200 checks that some Americans received, extended and enhanced unemployment insurance benefits, and part of that was done to keep people from trying to go back to work. You know, we wanted people to shelter in place. We wanted to limit infections. So for a time, people were receiving, some people, unemployed folks who qualified, $600 a week from the federal government on top of their state unemployment insurance benefits. And then, of course, Paycheck Protection Program, loans and grants to businesses. Now, less than a month later, further stimulus is injected into the economy. You might remember that the Paycheck Protection monies ran out very, very quickly. So more stimulus is introduced into the economy in April of 2020. But then after April of 2020, for many months, no major stimulus was injected into the economy by Congress. So by that point, in May and June and July of last year, remember, U.S. economy is adding millions of jobs, 4.8 million jobs in June alone. Unemployment is falling. But by the fourth quarter of last year, as the stimulus had worked its way through the economy, the momentum is faltering. After Labor Day, we had another viral surge. The economy is not performing particularly well. So on December 27th, 9 months after he signed the CARES Act, Donald Trump signs the Consolidated Appropriations Act. This is a $906 billion stimulus package. Again, more direct payments to Americans, more extended and enhanced unemployment insurance, rental assistance, so on and so forth, more loans and grants to businesses. Now, all this news has been trumped by the latest stimulus package signed by Joe Biden on March 11th, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. This was a $1.9 trillion package. Lots of stimulus here. Again, more direct payments to Americans. I gotta tell you, I think the politicians appreciate the fact that Americans like direct payments. They like the direct payments. And so you see this in stimulus package after stimulus package. More extended and enhanced unemployment insurance, this time $300 a week. But this time was different. This included something a bit different from the previous packages, direct financial aid to state and local governments. Please don't get me wrong. There was a lot of money that flowed from federal coffers to state and local governments last year, but it was prescribed money. It was designated for fairly specific purposes, in particular to bulk up healthcare delivery capacity. This time was different. $350 billion in general fund relief to state and local governments with very few strings attached. Some strings, but not many. The notion is, here you go, Governor, spend it well and spend it in health, or Madam Mayor, please spend it wisely. You might remember on Capitol Hill, there was a big debate about whether or not we should do this last year. The notion was we don't want to bail out states like New Jersey and Illinois. Do you remember that discussion? We don't want to bail out New Jersey and Illinois. As it turns out, in this country, there's a fair amount of antipathy toward people from New Jersey and Illinois, which I think is perfectly crazy, as those are excellent people, at least those folks from Illinois. This package also included more money for small businesses, public health, so on and so forth. But all of a sudden, a lot of state governments find themselves pretty flush with cash. The state of Maryland will receive not quite $4 billion in assistance. The city of Baltimore around $670 million in assistance. So again, Mr. Mayor, please spend it wisely. Now you could ask the question, are we being Dumbledore? Albus Dumbledore, of course, the greatest headmaster of Hogwarts School, made famous by the Harry Potter books and movies, a school for witches and wizards. We entered this crisis with a $23.5 trillion national debt. This slide suggests that we're screaming towards $28 trillion. As it turns out, we are now past $28 trillion in terms of our national debt, and we'll scream towards $30 trillion over the course of the current federal fiscal year, which ends on September 30th. So I was taught in economics, there is no free lunch. There's no free lunch. And so I presume that at some point we're going to pay this back. If not literally, then in some other form. This is going to come back to bite us. I don't think it's a 2021 or 2022 issue based on the way the bond market is dealing with all of this, but this is a problem for the future, and it's one that was made worse by the pandemic and, of course, the response to the pandemic. Now, let's talk about some other implications of 2020 and the shared global public health crisis. So one of the things that we also observed last year was a shift in what we buy and where we buy. So one of the aspects of 2020 was that we suffered a lot of retail bankruptcy, large-scale retail bankruptcy. And I still think we have to be worried about the brick and mortar retailers in particular, even though we're toward the latter stages perhaps of this pandemic, hopefully. So here's a list of some of the large-scale bankruptcies, retail bankruptcies sustained in 2020. So back in February, before the crisis really becomes one in North America, Pier 1 Imports goes bankrupt, closing all of its stores. They can still buy their merchandise online. In April, True Religion goes bankrupt. They're the provider of those excellent jeans that make everyone look slender. Then sequentially, J. Crew, Neiman Marcus, JCPenney go bankrupt in May. GNC, the provider of those excellent supplements that many of us take to become healthier, those pills. Sometimes we take them to build up musculature. I pop them like crazy. I still have the arms of an accountant. Brooks Brothers goes bankrupt in July. Lord & Taylor, that hallowed department store, goes bankrupt in August. And then quite late last year, Francesca's, which is one of my daughter's all-time favorites. So judging from their spending patterns, many of these are their all-time favorites. They go bankrupt on December 3rd. Now, what's interesting about this to me is that actually last year was not a bad year for retail sales. Unable to take vacations or go to ballparks, we ended up actually buying a lot of stuff. This is monthly retail sales in America. 21 years of data here, back to April of 2000. So now, there were some months of weakness here. Yes, so retail sales began to slump in February of 2020. February of 2020. What's going on in February of 2020? Well, let's do some rewinding here. So back in February of 2020, you and I have heard about COVID-19. Some people are beginning to partially withdraw from the economy because they're scared of infection, scared of the unknown. They're not going out as much, they're canceling vacations. So retail sales begin to fall in February. Indeed, the National Bureau of Economic Research's Business Cycle Data Committee dates the recession to have begun in February of 2020. For this reason, primarily, retail sales began to slump. Then we shut down the economy in earnest in March and April, and you can see that big dip in retail sales if you look for the right side of this graph. But lo and behold, what do you observe thereafter? A sharp bounce back in retail sales after a couple of months. By June, retail sales are above their pre-recession peak. What's going on here? Stimulus payments, stepped up unemployment insurance. Many people don't lose their jobs, so income is coming into the household, but it's not money that they can spend at restaurants or taking a vacation, so they end up buying things. Retail sales take off, and they keep taking off. Now, we've had, obviously, stimulus passed in December of last year, March of this year. So you can see how strong retail sales have been recently. April retail sales were roughly equivalent to March of retail sales, maybe March and April of this year. But very strong at elevated levels. How do we reconcile this fairly strong retail performance with all that bankruptcy? Well, ask yourself the question, who won retail market share over the course of the crisis? This is US retail sales by type of business. So there are some brick and mortar categories that actually fared pretty well. This is from February 2020 through April of 2021. Again, pre-pandemic to latest month for which we have data, so a 14-month period. So at the very top here, which saw the most growth in retail activity? Sporting goods, hobby, book, and music stores. What is that about? That is about the sale of Peloton bikes and other exercise equipment. If you couldn't go to the gym, people brought the gym into the house. They bought exercise equipment. Second, motor vehicles and parts dealers. We've seen surging auto sales recently. A lot of pent-up demand for automobiles, low interest rates, so on and so forth. So a lot of sales of motor vehicles. So you see that growth there. But number three, the internet. That's e-commerce. That's Jeff Bezos and Amazon, for instance. Amazon stock up 20.5 today at 3290.89, as it turns out. In any case, that's the internet. Jeff Bezos has done pretty well during this crisis. I think he probably has enough on which to retire by this point. In fact, he doesn't have to be CEO of Amazon anymore. In fact, he's announced that he's no longer going to be that. Now, at the very bottom of the slide, you can see some of the categories that fared poorly. At the very bottom, food services and drinking places. Food services and drinking places. Most human beings refer to that as restaurants and bars. We economists call that food services and drinking places, which is one of the many reasons many of us have never been on a date. Then if you go up a couple categories from that, clothing and clothing accessory stores. Now, March and April were pretty good months for apparel sales, as we're starting to go back outside and taking off our masks and people can see us again. But for many months, of course, apparel performed very, very badly. Why? We weren't in each other's presence. No one was judging us, but we didn't have to dress up. I mean, question for you, Carroll County, am I wearing pants? You don't know, and I shall not be telling. Now, I just want to point out one other category because I'm going to talk about it just a bit more in a moment. The fourth category from the top, building material and garden supplies dealers, that's your Home Depot and your Lowe's. So why have people been going to Home Depot and Lowe's? Well, what did we do over the past year? We spent a lot of time at home. And what do people do when they spend time at home? They notice everything about their home that's not right. And that translates into somebody, maybe a homeowner or a contractor, going to a Home Depot. Restaurant reservations. I know there's some restaurateurs in this audience. Let's talk about restaurant reservations. So one of the aspects of this is that because the economy was changing so quickly during the worst of the crisis, many economists and other observers didn't want to wait around for the monthly economics data or the quarterly data. We wanted high frequency data. So one of the most popular data series during this crisis has been initial claims for unemployment insurance, which comes out every Thursday morning. These data are even more high frequency. These data come out each and every day from Open Table, US restaurant reservations. Now you see this squiggly green line here? That reflects the percentage change in restaurant reservations versus the same day back in 2019, pre-pandemic. So if you look at this chart, you can see that by March and April of last year, restaurant reservations are at negative 100%. Now my staff in Baltimore created this slide for me. They're mostly in their 20s and 30s, and they took the vertical axis down to negative 120%. I need to tell them once we get back in the office that the most you can go down is negative 100%, but please set that aside. That's an internal staffing issue. Now, if you look here, you can see the bounce back in restaurant reservations into May and June. But then what happened? A loss of progress. Why? Summer surge in viral infections last year. You remember that? Florida, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Southern California, some other places. So when people saw evidence that the rate of infection was rising, they pulled back, including pulling back on going out, including to restaurants. Now, there was a surge in restaurant reservations by Labor Day, but then after Labor Day, another viral surge and a loss of momentum. Now, what's been happening more recently? We've been seeing restaurant reservations go back up toward the 2019 levels. Why? Because vaccinations. Normalcy is returning. Mask mandates are being taken away. Whether rightly or wrongly, that's for you to decide, but the point is that's happening. And so I would say to you that if you're interested in going to a restaurant on a particular day, let's say this summer, book now, because you're going to see a frenzied demand to be at high quality restaurants over the next few months. There's a lot of pent up demand there. And I'm going to talk about the fact that consumers have a fair amount of spending power associated with them right now. Now, let's continue to talk about aspects of the pandemic and the response of people to the pandemic, the implications of the pandemic. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Harry Potter books and movies, but if you are, you know that any wizard or witch who gains admittance to Hogwarts is allocated into one of 4 houses. And this is true for every witch or wizard. So there's Hufflepuff, there's Gryffindor, and as it turns out, Harry Potter himself is a member of Gryffindor House, along with his 2 best friends, Ronald Weasley and Hermione Granger. I'm from Baltimore, and so every wizard from Baltimore ends up in Ravenclaw. It's just the rule. I'm not making this stuff up. I'm just telling you what it is. There's some other rules. So if you're from Pittsburgh, you end up in Slytherin. I'm just telling you what it is. Again, I'm not making this stuff up. And if you don't like it, you can take it up with Hogwarts administration. So one of the other aspects of 2020 was that the cost of capital declined. Interest rates fell. Here I'm showing you 2 interest rates of interest, the 50-year fixed mortgage rate in red and the 30-year fixed mortgage rate in blue. And just to defend what I just said, mortgage rates fell. I don't think it would surprise any member of the chamber or any prospective member of the chamber that home prices were rising prior to the crisis. Well, of course they were. We were adding jobs plentifully pre-pandemic. Wages are rising in the context of a 50-year low in unemployment. Mortgage rates were low prior to the pandemic. They just became even lower during the pandemic. I think one could view it as somewhat surprising that the pace of home price appreciation accelerated during the crisis. This is the S&P Case-Shiller U.S. National Home Price Index. And again, you can see here this rapid acceleration in home price appreciation. Homes have become more valuable. What's going on here? Why? We're down 8.2 million jobs. The labor force is smaller than it was. Consumer confidence is lower than it was. Well, of course, part of the answer here relates to those lower interest rates, but there's more at work here. A lot more at work. Many of us have wanted to more aggressively social distance during the pandemic, and it's easier to do that from a home than an apartment building, particularly one with an elevator. We've wanted more space attached to our residences because we're spending more time at home, including space for that home office or home gym. There's the spectrum of demographics. So the millennials are coming of age. The millennials, the oldest of them will turn 40 this year. They're no longer young kids. So they're forming households, moving around, buying homes. So all kinds of factors here. Now, one of the things that this has done is it has triggered a supply side response. Demand rises, supply tends to rise. So one of the reasons, of course, for that is that the inventory of unsold homes is low. That's been another factor in driving prices higher. This is months of inventory by Maryland County, March of 2021. Showing you Carroll County in green. The months of supply in Carroll County, half a month. Now, there was a time when realtors would define equilibrium as about 6 months of available supply. We're down to half a month. So that's the issue right now in Carroll County. If you want to live in Carroll County, and by the way, many people do, and why not? Great schools, great environment, great business community, great chamber, great library. The problem is, of course, there's not much choice right now. There's bidding wars, so on and so forth, for that precious county real estate. Now, again, this has triggered a supply side response. One of the things I want to do as I march toward the tail end of this presentation, and I've got about 11 minutes left. One of the things I want to do for you is I want to show you some leading economic indicators. You'll see a number of them. Here's one. This is U.S. residential building permits. It's a leading indicator Because if you're a builder, you've got to pull a permit before you build something. Now, the segment of interest here is the red segment. That relates to single unit structures, whether townhomes or single family detached homes. Now, it shouldn't surprise anyone here that prior to the crisis, there was a bit of a surge in single family building permitting. Of course, the economy is strong, mortgage rates are low, wages are rising rapidly, and so more people are aspiring toward home ownership. Then during the initial phase of the crisis, you can see your permits fall for all kinds of reasons. Home builders became more uncertain about the future. Some of the offices that issue building permits, those government offices themselves, didn't have the capacity to issue those permits. But then what do you see here, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the chart very carefully, again, the red segment, you see letter V. So now I've shown you a few things. Gross domestic product, employment growth, the pace at which unemployment fell, retail sales, and now residential building permits all manifesting that V-shaped trajectory. Permitting is strong right now. Now, permitting has become a little bit weaker in the last few weeks. Why? Because the price of softwood lumber has gone up so much and other construction materials. So when the price of construction materials goes up, sometimes it's difficult for home builders to make a profit, given all of the mathematics. But it is still the case that permitting is much stronger than it was pre-crisis. And what does this reflect? Well, many things, but one of them is migration patterns. This is in millions. So you see the red bar here? The red bar represents the 2 million people who moved out of principal cities last year. You see the blue colored bar? That reflects the 3 million people who moved into suburbs last year, some from rural areas where, for instance, some places don't have broadband, some from urban areas. But the point is the suburbs added a lot of population last year. And Carroll County, one could view as a suburb of not just Baltimore, but also the Washington metropolitan area. So again, lots of demand for suburban residences, and that helps explain why Carroll County's inventory of unsold homes is so low. Now, what's going on here? Let's talk about this. The value of proximity declined last year. What do I mean by that? So ask yourself the question, why is Manhattan so expensive? Proximity. Manhattan is home to a massive labor market. It's home to the two largest central business districts in America, that being Wall Street, of course, the financial district, and Midtown. It is home to Central Park. It is home to Broadway, fabulous restaurants, proximity. But in a world of remote work, online sales, and streaming of Netflix, proximity is not as valuable, and you can see that reflected in many ways. This is observed rent declines or changes between March and December of last year. So if you look at the left-hand column, what am I trying to say here? Between March and December of last year, apartment rents in San Francisco fell 27%. Seattle, 22%, Boston, 21%, New York, 20%, Washington, 15%. Why? Proximity is not as valuable. People are leaving cities for the suburbs. Now, there probably will be some return to the cities after this pandemic is over, but often at lower rents. That's what's going to induce people back into the cities. Proximity is not quite as valuable given the changing structure of the economy. So it is perfectly conceivable now that someone could have a job in Manhattan or downtown Washington, but live in Carroll County and work from their home. That's the point. Now, rents are not declining everywhere. Look at the right-hand column, Fresno, California, for instance. So one of the things that we economists have talked a lot about is the fact that people have been moving from cities to suburbs. We've not talked as much about the fact that many people have been moving from more expensive areas to less expensive areas. And they can do that if they're working remotely or if there are other kinds of factors, of course, at work. Here's another way of looking at things. You see the dark purple line here? That's the red decline registered in principal cities over the course of last year's 12 months. So that's your Chicago, New York, Seattle, but also includes Dallas and Houston and places where rents have not been in steep decline. You see the light purple line there? That's suburban cities. So I'm from Baltimore. So Baltimore's suburban cities are the likes of Ellicott City, Columbia, Towson, Lutherville, Timonium, Moncton, Pikesville, Owings Mills, White Marsh, Westminster, of course, Bel Air, Severna Park, Annapolis, Glen Burnie. I could go on, I think I am. The point is, that's not where the population is leaving, so that's not where the rents are declining. Again, there's a desire to live in the suburbs, and that's not about home ownership, it's also sometimes about apartment rental. Now, let's talk about commercial construction. I would say to you, chamber members and prospective chamber members, that commercial construction will be among the last segments of the economy to recover. And that's because remote work and its effect on the office space, it's about business travel and the fact that we can have meetings like this on GoToWebinar or Zoom or Microsoft Teams, so on and so forth. It's about e-commerce and all that abandoned retail space in malls and in other contexts. So as I say, as defined by the U.S. Census Bureau, there's 16 categories of non-residential construction in our country. All are reflected here. And these horizontal bars reflect the percentage change in construction spending for the 5-year period spanning from February 2015 to February of 2020. So why did I stop with February 2020? It's because that was the last pre-pandemic month economically. So what I'm trying to show here is what we were building a lot of during the 5 years coming into the pandemic. At the very top here, lodging. What's that? Hotel rooms. We built a ton of hotel rooms just before this pandemic. And now people are accustomed to having meetings on Zoom and so on and so forth. Look, don't get me wrong. A lot of business people want to get back out there and meet face-to-face with their customers, clients, so on and so forth, but they don't have to do that. And by not doing that, they can save on, they save time, not as many airport terminals to linger in. They can spend less money on rented vehicles or on airfare, so on and so forth, hotels. Office. We built a ton of office space just before the pandemic, a lot of wonderful office space, Class A plus stuff. But now more workers want to work remotely and have proven that they can be productive working remotely. So again, these are some of the segments in which I think there'll be some ongoing weakness going forward. You can see some of that reflected here. Same setup, 16 categories of non-residential construction, but now the timeline is different. It's February 2020 versus March 2021. So pre-pandemic to the latest month for which we have these data. If you look at the very bottom here, lodging, that's hotel room construction. It's down, obviously. And if you look for the middle of the slide, office-based construction is down. But that's misleading because the office category also includes data centers. Now, data centers are under frenzied construction. I don't know if anyone's been in Northern Virginia recently, but Northern Virginia is a real hub for data center construction activity. So, so it's actually much worse in terms of construction of traditional office space. And I think one of the things you're going to see is a lot of businesses that have been renting very nice downtown office space, paying lots of rent per square foot, are going to think about, I need less space, and I might move to the suburbs because increasingly my team members are moving to the suburbs. Those millennials are moving to the suburbs. And so if they're going to be in the suburbs, why don't I move closer to them and save some money on office space in the process? So I think that's one of the things you're going to see. And again, that's one of the reasons that commercial real estate will be weak for quite some time in much of the country. Finally, let me hit the final part of the presentation, the crystal ball. Now, we economists have a tendency to excessively complicate matters, don't we? And we do this on purpose. The notion is that if you can't understand what we're saying, we must be pretty smart. But really, economics boils down to just two things: demand and supply. That's all you get. Demand and supply. And in America, 2/3 of demand comes from the American household and its expenditures. So you've heard this statement 1,000 times. The American consumer is 2/3 of the economy. What they really are 2/3 of aggregate demand. It's why we monitor their psychology so carefully. Are they happy? Are they confident? Do they like the president? Here I'm showing you the University of Michigan's Index of Consumer Sentiment. So when the folks in Michigan are not being hammered by Ohio State, they also produce this index. And the consumer psychologically is precisely where you would think they would be. They're not as pessimistic as they were early in the crisis, but they're not back to pre-pandemic levels of confidence. That said, I could make the argument that consumers, or at least households in this country, have never been in better financial shape. That consumers or households have never been in better financial shape. Now, that sounds at some level very insensitive. I'm aware, and you are aware, that many Americans lost their health insurance during this crisis when they needed it most. That many people are facing food insecurity. They have to go to food pantries to eat for the first time in their lives. That many people are facing evictions as these various eviction moratoria expire. That many people are behind on their student loans, so on and so forth. That's right. Microeconomically, there are major issues out there. But macroeconomically, from a big picture perspective, households are in pretty good financial shape. I mean, again, collectively, this is the US savings rate. This is savings as a percentage of personal disposable income. So what is this basically? This is a reflection of the amount of money that people take out of their paychecks every couple of weeks and set aside into a savings account, a 401k, but they don't spend it right away. That's the point. Now, coming into the crisis, the US savings rate is around 8%. By April of last year, that's the big peak you see here, it's 33.7%. Again, what's going on? Some people don't lose their jobs, income is coming to the household. Stimulus payments, stepped up unemployment insurance for those people who lose their jobs. So money's coming to the household, not easily spent. Restaurants are closed, malls are closed, theaters are closed, ballparks are closed, vacations are canceled. Now again, as the economy reopens and spending opportunities emerge, those savings turn to expenditures, the economy takes off, 4.8 million jobs added in June, unemployment down to 6%, so on and so forth. But as late as March of 2021, in part thanks to the Biden stimulus package, the savings rate is still a lofty 27.6%. So there's a lot of dry powder out there on consumer balance sheets, household balance sheets. Why, therefore, did the economy only add 266,000 jobs in April? Because it's demand and supply, and the supply side is still constrained. You see the shortages of chlorine, softwood lumber, oil more recently, the rising price of natural gas, and also a lack of confidence within the small business community. This is the National Federation of Independent Businesses Index of Small Business Optimism. Question Small Business America, is it a good time to expand your business over the next 3 months? Answer, not really. In April, only 14% of small business operators said yes to this question. The previous month, it was 11%. In February, it was 6%. So a lot of small businesses out there are still trying to hold on to cash. They're not ready to grow yet. They're scared. And so this is one of the reasons the supply side is not taking off, and we're not adding even more jobs. Now, the other fact, of course, is a lot of people are saying, look, I'm receiving unemployment insurance, or my kids are learning remotely, or all of the above, and so I'm going to stay out of the labor force right now. So there's lots of job openings out there. In fact, a record number of job openings in America, but I'm not ready to fill one of them. So all kinds of things that work here, but the economy is not quite ready to really take off. Final slide. For an economy to flourish, both demand and supply sides of the economy must participate. Look, with ongoing stimulus, demand gets a further boost. You can see that high savings rate. But supply continues to be constrained by numerous factors, and not just in America. You can see what's been happening in India, Spain, Portugal, Paris, Italy, Ireland, England, South Africa, other parts of the world. It's a global economy. So the result is that the US savings rate will remain elevated in the short term, and that will spring-load the economy for rapid economic growth once vaccines become even more broadly available and the economy continues to blossom and reopen. So my prediction to you is this, Chamber members: the back half of 2021 should be simply spectacular for economic growth, spectacular. And that is also the case in Carroll County, with its diverse economy, including manufacturers, financial services, consumer spending, so on and so forth. However, there will be a day of reckoning as deficit hawks come back into fashion. This national debt is massive. And again, no free lunch. That's what I learned in economics. Some people disagree, and we'll see. But at some point in the future, not in 2021 or 2022, I don't think, but at some point in the future, this will come back to haunt us. But again, it's 2021. Enjoy the balance of the year. It's going to be really good economically. And with that, again, let me thank our event sponsors, the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce, the Carroll County Public Library, Exploration Commons at 50 East, the Community Media Center, and of course, Aquino Financial Group, LLC. And so with that, Zach, let's open up for Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Anirban. Great as always. As a reminder to everyone, please feel free to submit questions. We have quite a few already. If you go to the GoToWebinar panel on the side of your screen, you'll see a little tab that says questions. Click on it, type in your question, and we'll get it over to Anirban. For starters, Anirban, do you feel that the U.S. will become even more a nation of haves and have-nots in terms of pace of recovery? Certain states and areas of the country will do very well post-pandemic, and other areas will continue to struggle or decline in areas of job prospects, housing, etc.
Right. So two separate questions. So one is about haves and have-nots across households. And believe it or not, I think that the division between haves and have-nots may begin to close at some point. Now, this seems very peculiar because we're used to talking about this K-shaped recovery, the fact that people who own assets, whether financial assets, money in the stock market, or who have a home or multiple homes have done very well in terms of their wealth profiles, and that people who lack assets have often also been the ones to have lost their jobs. These are the restaurant workers, hotel workers, so on and so forth. So the gaps between haves and have-nots has clearly widened during the pandemic. But here's the thing: we have a lot of job openings in this country. Wages are trying to grow very, very quickly now in the context of labor shortages. You'll see that over the course of the summer when restaurants and hotels and others are scrambling for workers. You can see Amazon is, continuing to hire, has raised the average compensation for entry-level workers to $17 an hour average across the country, above that $15 an hour minimum wage that they implemented many quarters ago. So that, and then of course, asset prices have been rising. The Dow Jones is up 40 points as I'm speaking to you right now, but there's going to be a time in which we're going to have a correction. Right? I mean, I think a lot of people out there would agree with the premise that the stock market looks pricey to them. Right? We've had a pandemic, the economy is smaller, and yet stock market has taken off. The S&P is sitting at 4,166 as I'm speaking to you. At the early stages of the crisis, the S&P was at 2,500. Now it's at almost 4,200. So at some point, I would say that you're going to see a bit of a catch-up for the have-nots. And now, with respect to the regional part of that question, so some communities, yes, here's the thing. The southern cities, in particular, are really taking off economically. What am I talking about? Charlotte, Nashville, Orlando, Austin, some of the cities also to the west, Boise, Idaho, Denver, Colorado, Phoenix, Arizona. These places are adding a ton of population. People might know that California lost population last year for the first time in 120 years. A lot of those folks moved to places like Boise and Denver and Phoenix and Austin and Houston, so on and so forth. And we continue to see this migration from the northern United States to the southern United States. And one of the things we have to be very careful about in Maryland, for instance, is our tax rates. Because, I say all the time that the largest concentration of Marylanders in this world is not in Baltimore, Maryland. It's in Naples, Florida. And whenever I go down there to speak, I see Marylanders all over the place. And so we're exporting a lot of wealth and tax base in the process, and we need to stop doing that. But of course, some communities like Connecticut and New Jersey do that even more aggressively, and Illinois. And so these states, we have to compete as Northerners with those southern upcoming cities, and we haven't done a very good job of that.
Great. Okay, let's go with, what is the forecast for startup businesses?
I think it's a great time to start up a business. I mean, this is a time of ferment in the economy, right? There are lots of behavioral shifts out there. And if one can spot these behavioral changes and supply, to these emerging needs, then one has a business model that can work. I think it's a great time to start a business. And often downturns are great times to start a business, because competition is on its back heel, and consumers are looking for new ideas, new experiences, so on and so forth. So now, unfortunately, and this is true pre-pandemic, we did not have a lot of business formation in America. Entrepreneurship has been down, believe it or not. I know Facebook and Google and Twitter and all the Oculus and all these emerging companies in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, but generally speaking, the number of business startups has been down over the course of time. During the pandemic, believe it or not, we saw an acceleration in the form of business formation. So what was happening? People were losing jobs, starting businesses. Or people were saying, you know what, I didn't like what I was doing before, I want to do something different. So I think you're going to see a lot of business formation going forward, and it's a great time to start a new business.
Great. So I'm going to turn our next question into a little bit of a follow-up on that one. So, as things improve and businesses and government workers get back into the office, do you think commercial real estate will give way permanently to hybrid working situations? And the follow-up part of that is, how many startups do you think won't have a physical presence at all, especially while they're getting off the ground?
Yeah, so many startups will not have that physical presence. And here's the thing. I think a lot of people enjoy working remotely. Now, there is this theory in business that, well, we need to get back together once in a while in a shared space. Why? To create, to what people refer to as ideate, to create ideas, to innovate, to talk about how we can improve the business. And sometimes that Zoom is not good enough for that, or GoToWebinar or Microsoft Teams is not good enough for that. but a lot of people enjoy not having to commute. You know, the commute in Central Maryland is grueling. I mean, I'm speaking of folks who take 795 a lot, you know, through the Metropolitan area or I-70, so on and so forth. It can be grueling, let's face it. And so people can avoid that several days a week. They love that. You know, there was a company recently that did a survey, a very large company that did a survey, financial services provider, and they asked people, would you take a $30,000 pay increase? Would you prefer that, or an ability to work from home several days a week? What would you prefer, the pay raise or working from home? Overwhelmingly, people said, forget about $30,000. I want to work from home more. So a lot of these employees, you know, if an employer demands that their employees come in 5 days a week, and sometimes, you know, if you're a restaurant but I'm talking about the white collar workforce, people who can work remotely. In many cases, employers are going to find that if I demand those employees to come back into the office 5 days a week, I'm going to lose some of them. So that'll be another dimension along which people compete for talent. And so that's, again, one of the reasons I think the commercial real estate, especially the office market, won't be as strong going forward as it had been.
Makes a lot of sense. Pivoting here, do you think cryptocurrencies have an emerging and stable place in economic activity, or is it still a speculative asset?
I still think it's a speculative asset. I don't understand, and I'm being honest here, I don't understand why Bitcoin is so valuable. Now it's trading at 43,834 as I was speaking to. It's down $331 this morning. But why is it so valuable? From where does its value emerge? I don't know. I can't explain it. Now, the fact of the matter is, if you can't beat them, you join them. So I have a Coinbase account in which I have, you know, some ownership of Bitcoin and Litecoin and Ethereum, Stellar Lumens, and some of these other cryptocurrencies. We've talked about that, Zach. But I don't understand why these things are so valuable. I just understand that they're gaining in value. But I think it's still speculative, and that it's not mainstream completely yet. We've had Elon Musk, you know, sort of, go back and forth with respect to Bitcoin's role in the economy, and whether or not Tesla will accept Bitcoin as payment for a Tesla. So, you know, all these things are happening. It's still speculative, and it bounces around so much from day to day. That's what tells you it's speculative still.
Perfect. So we've gotten a ton of questions about inflation, and I want you to get to that. But first, staying on cryptocurrency for a second, were you disappointed that with recent news on inflation, the price of Bitcoin fell, where I think a lot of people were, hoping in the face of inflation that would kind of be a sanctuary for investment?
Yeah. So the notion is a store of value. That it's a limited supply, of course, based on these algorithms. So I think in the Bitcoin algorithm, there can only be a total of 20 or 21 million Bitcoin produced over the course of time. So there's so much that moves Bitcoin. So yes, we have inflationary pressures, and this could be a store of value and debasing of currencies. And so Bitcoin could be a store of value that isn't related to government or government policy. But again, you've got Elon Musk. You've got other factors at work. And right now, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are at this very key, pivotal moment in which the question is, will it become mainstream or not? It's made a lot of progress in becoming mainstream, right? So very important people like the CEO of JP Morgan have been saying, look, this is something that we have to consider as a foundational asset in a portfolio. But at the same time, people are still wondering, why is it so valuable? From where does it derive its value? So long answer to your short question, but I wasn't disappointed by that. I'm not surprised. Bitcoin is going to bounce around for all kinds of reasons during the months ahead. It's not a great store of value because it bounces around so much. It's not a great medium of exchange because it bounces around so much. So we're not there yet in terms of accepting Bitcoin as mainstream. So no, and it's down to $11 today, as it turns out.
And I'll add to that, there's serious environmental problems with Bitcoin. A legislative hammer that's, potentially going to fall at any second. So there's risk factors out there.
That's correct, Zach. So there's environmental issues with the mining of Bitcoin, which is why Elon Musk said that we're not going to accept Bitcoin anymore for the payment for Teslas because of the environmental implications. But there's more. It's harder for government to monitor transactions. So you could have, transactions that are not beneficial societally, and also a lot of tax evasion as well. So yes, I think there's a legislative risk, a regulatory risk to Bitcoin and some of these other cryptocurrencies. This is not the way I'd invest the broad part of a portfolio. This, if you've got play money that you're willing to lose, you can throw it into Coinbase, into one of these cryptocurrencies. But otherwise, I wouldn't touch it.
Great. So then, pivoting more broadly to inflation not related to cryptocurrencies. And again, we've gotten a ton of questions on this, so thank you for those. I'm kind of mashing these all together. Can you talk about, inflation in this current moment, give us a 12-month outlook, and then kind of a long-term look at some of the implications of this current inflationary moment?
So the word of the day on inflation is transitory. So the question is inflation that we're seeing, this surplus inflation above, let's say 2%, is that transitory or is it semi-permanent? And so when you hear people like Janet Yellen, our Treasury Secretary, or Jerome Powell, our Federal Reserve Chairman, speak, they largely are in the camp of this is transitory. This is a shock from the restarting of the economy, and it's going to go away as supply chains are become better organized, and as we see an end to this short-term surge in demand. The equation would be something like surplus inflation equals alpha times transitory plus 1 minus alpha, not transitory. Solve for alpha. So in that equation, as it turns out, if alpha equaled 1, all of the surplus inflation is transitory. If alpha is 0, then all of this inflation that we're seeing is permanent. Now, as it turns out, alpha is between 0 and 1. So the question becomes, how much is transitory and how much is permanent? My view is that, yes, the surge in softwood lumber, steel, copper, other commodity prices, oil, natural gas, is largely transitory. The supply chains are in disarray around the world, and some of these prices will start to come down. In fact, I think we've already seen the peak of softwood lumber prices. But what have we also done during the crisis? We've created a lot of new money supply. We've driven up national debts massively. And all those things would tend toward inflation and also higher interest rates. So I think some of this is more permanent than might a Jerome Powell or a Janet Yellen. Now look, she's Treasury Secretary, he's Federal Reserve Chairman, she was Federal Reserve Chairperson. So who am I? I'm just from Baltimore. But I think that this inflation story is real and has some legs, and that even after we get through this initial reopening of the economy, this complete reopening of the economy, we will still see inflation meaningfully higher than it had been pre-pandemic. That's because we have so much money floating around the global economy. And again, that's one of the reasons that some of these cryptocurrencies may retain value going forward.
Great. Do you see a housing market crash on the horizon? Rates can't continue to drop and prices continue to rise forever.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So I do not see a housing market crash or collapse because I don't see a bubble. So back in 02, 03, 04, 05, 06 into 07, we were building a ton of homes. So what was happening was that the supply of homes was rising while prices were rising. And that's because people were speculating in homes, they're flipping homes, all kinds of things were taking place. So the supply-demand equilibrium did not support those high prices. Today, what is the issue? It's very similar. So yes, we've got a lot of demand for housing, but not necessarily to flip homes. More of this is to live in these homes. I don't see as much flipping activity as I did back then. Some activity, of course. Some of those people who buy homes and sell them right away, yeah, that's always going to exist. But not like I did back in 05 and 06, for instance. And the supply of unsold homes is very low. And then, you've got zoning restrictions in many communities. So there are a lot of builders who would love to build more homes in a place like Carroll County, for instance, or Baltimore County, but they don't have as much residentially zoned land available to them to purchase as they would like. So what happens is homes go unbuilt. I'm not saying that's good policy or bad policy, but it keeps supply lower than it otherwise would be. It keeps it suppressed. So I don't see a housing bubble out there. Now, is it conceivable that home prices will start to fall at some point? Yes. And what would cause that to happen? Higher interest rates. So if you were to tell me that interest rates are going to rise massively over the next couple of years, or at least significantly over the next couple of years, I would say, well, if home prices rise meaningfully, then you're not going to get the appreciation in homes that we've been seeing. And I think that's probably a likely outlook. So I think one of the things that you're going to see over the next couple of years, interest rates are going to rise and the pace of home price appreciation will slow. And if the rise in interest rates is sufficient, you might actually see home prices start to fall a bit, sales prices start to fall a bit. But again, no bubble is there to burst.
Great. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left, Anirban, so we're hitting the speed round. I'm going to read this question word for word because, I think they did a good job theming it. What would you consider the 3 most important things one can do now to make themselves master of success over the next 10 years, like the Deathly Hallows? And Cliff Ingle gets 100 points for Gryffindor for keeping that on theme.
Oh, yes, very well done. Extraordinarily well executed on that. So, look, I say it's true for young people and not so young people, right? I think success in America is very possible still. The American dream is very much alive. The American middle class is very much alive. And so, the keys are what they have always been. Number 1, figure out what you love to do. Number 2, wrap a career around that passion. And number 3, be patient. And an aspect of being patient is saving money and investing money. And if you do those things, find out what you're really passionate about, do that for your living, and then be patient in terms of saving and investment, the American dream is very much there for you, as is a wonderful retirement. So that's what I would say over the next 10 years. I would say that over the next 100 years, if the question was that.
Okay, and then again, we're still in the speed round. We've gotten a lot of questions about the housing market. Could you speak, specifically about Carroll County in the context of, their median days on market in April was 5. That's, pretty low, obviously. What do you see in the near and short term for Carroll County's housing market?
Oh, there'll still be bidding wars for available homes. So it's a great time to sell your house. The problem is what? It's obvious. If you sell your house, you might have to buy another one. And then, so you're a buyer in a seller's market. So, yes. So what that shows or suggests from a public policy perspective is there's not enough permitting taking place for housing construction in Carroll County. Now, look, very controversial issue because it gets to quality of life and density of population and traffic and school capacity and all these kinds of things. So I don't want to get into that, but the market is saying that there is surplus demand for Carroll County addresses, and government might want to think about how it can address that demand to the benefit of all, including in the form of tax-based formation. So that's the answer to that question. It's going to remain that way. And again, a lot of this is because of zoning restrictions, limits on density, and those people might view those as perfectly appropriate. But the market is screaming and saying, we need more housing opportunities in Carroll County. The inventory is not there, and whatever comes on the market is being sold almost instantaneously.
Great. Okay. This viewer asks, in my opinion, we came out of the Great Recession due to an increase in wages. What is the forecast for wage increases broadly and for your employees specifically? I added that last part.
Yes. So as you know, Zach, I've been very generous with wage increases for key staff in recent years. Set that aside. I'm trying not to get angry. Look, we have more job openings in this country than we've ever had before. We have a labor force participation rate in this country of just 61.7%. So right now we have too many jobs chasing too few workers. And what that means, of course, is that wages are going to keep rising. And it's not just because governments are raising the minimum wages. A lot of this is coming from the private sector. Banks, are establishing minimum wages. Companies like Amazon, Walmart, other companies are, establishing these what would have once been considered pretty lofty minimum wages. So wages are going to keep climbing into 2022 and beyond quite rapidly, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Demand is going to be strong. Demand for workers is going to be strong. Wages rise.
Great. Okay, and just about a minute left. What is your take on the president's Build America Better plan, especially the going green aspect of it?
Yeah, I think it's, we are headed toward electric vehicles, I think. One of the things I own is a 2019 Ford Mustang Bullet, 8 cylinders, 480 horsepower, 420 pound-feet of torque. It makes a crazy amount of noise, and I love it. I hate the way these electric vehicles sound, sort of squeak away, but that's the future. And so, if we can have these charging stations and get to the future faster, I think it's good for the environment. It's good for America because we want to be the leaders in electric vehicle production. Thank you, Elon Musk, for positioning us to be that. There are some aspects of that package that many people know that really aren't infrastructure. And that's the nature of this debate right now. What should be in an infrastructure package? But I'm fine with the notion of a cleaner, greener economy. That doesn't bother me. But of course, we're going to spend also old-fashioned money on roads and bridges and find financing mechanisms for that traditional infrastructure.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Anirban. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you to everyone who joined in and watched. Huge thank you to the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce for making this event possible, to our sponsors, the Carroll County Public Library, Exploration Commons, Community Media Center, and Aquino Financial Group. We really appreciate it. I'm Zach Fritz with Sage Policy Group, and we hope to see you again. Thanks.